I found out my husband was cheating on me because of a mistake he made with our joint bank account. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those ordinary days when you expect nothing to happen. I had parked in front of the grocery store, scrolling through my phone before getting out. I opened the bank app just to check how much we had left for the week. We were saving for a bathroom remodel, and I had been tracking every expense. The numbers loaded, and then I saw it. A charge from the night before, $264 at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the wine list is longer than the menu. The kind of place he once told me was ridiculous to pay for pasta. My first thought was that it might have been a work dinner. He sometimes had those, and the company would reimburse him. But then I saw the timestamp, 8:46 p.m. The same time he had texted me saying, still stuck at the office. Might be late. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. I could have confronted him right there in the parking lot, but something stopped me. If I asked too soon, he would have time to prepare his story. So I closed the app, got out of the car, and went inside the store. I bought milk, bread, and eggs, the same things I always bought. The cashier asked if I wanted a receipt. I said no. My hands shook as I placed the bags in the trunk. The cold air made me feel alert, almost steady, but my mind kept replaying the numbers. $264, 8:46 p.m. That night, he came home a little after 9. He hung his coat neatly on the hook, dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, and kissed me on the cheek. His tie was loosened, his shirt unbuttoned at the top. There was a faint smell of cologne on him, not the one he usually wore to work. I asked how his day had been. He said busy. He said his boss was on his back about a project. He said he barely had time to eat. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and changed the subject to something he had seen on the news. I let him talk. Later, when he got into the shower, I stood in the hallway and listened to the water running. My eyes went to his suit jacket draped over the chair. I walked over, reached into the inner pocket, and pulled out a folded receipt. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, a shared dessert, and a handwritten note from the waitress at the bottom. Hope you both enjoyed your anniversary dinner. It wasn't our anniversary. I folded the receipt exactly the way I found it and put it back. I told myself maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a joke from the waitress. Maybe he had been with a colleague. But the truth was already in my stomach, heavy and cold. The next day, I went to work as if nothing had happened. I answered emails, sat in meetings, and ate lunch at my desk. But every few minutes, I opened the bank app just to look at the charge again. I read the line item until the numbers blurred. That evening, he said he had to stay late. I told him it was fine, hung up, and grabbed my coat. I drove downtown and parked across from his office building. I kept the engine running, the heater blowing warm air against my face. About an hour later, I saw him. He was walking out with a woman in a long beige coat. She was laughing at something he said. He touched her back lightly as they crossed the street. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until they ached. I didn't follow them. I just watched until they disappeared into the crowd. The traffic light turned green and cars moved around me. I stayed until the street was almost empty, then drove home. He came in around midnight, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. He said there had been a crisis with a client. I nodded, pretending to be half asleep on the couch. He kissed my forehead and went straight to the shower. For the next 3 days, I acted as if nothing was wrong. I cooked dinner, asked about his day, and even laughed when he made a joke about my burnt toast on Saturday morning. But every time I looked at him, I saw the woman in the beige coat. I saw his hand on her back. I saw the words on the receipt. By Sunday night, I couldn't keep it in. I told him I wanted to take him out for lunch on Monday. He seemed surprised, but agreed. He asked if it was for something special. I said no. I just felt like it. The next day, we sat in a small cafe near my office. He scrolled through his phone while we waited for the food. I watched his face, the way his eyes darted over the screen. I asked how work was going. He said busy, as usual. I asked if he had been going out much after work. He shook his head. No, not really. So I asked about the Italian restaurant. For a split second, he froze. Then he smiled and said it was a client dinner. He said the note on the receipt must have been for someone else, that the waitress had written it by mistake. He looked right at me as he said it. I didn't believe him, but I smiled back, picked up my coffee cup, and didn't ask anything else, because I already knew what I was going to do next. When we left the cafe, I told him I needed to get back to work. He kissed me quickly before heading toward the parking lot. I stood there for a moment, watching him walk away, wondering how easily he could lie to my face without blinking. Back at my desk, I tried to concentrate on emails, but my mind kept going over every detail. The bill, the woman in the beige coat, the way he froze for that fraction of a second when I mentioned the restaurant. By mid-afternoon, I had decided that I needed proof. Proof that could not be brushed off with a joke about a waitress or a story about a client. That evening, when he came home, I asked casually if he would be working late again this week. He shrugged and said maybe Thursday. I nodded, pretending it was just small talk. But in my head, Thursday became my target. For the next 2 days, I watched him more closely. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning, still sent quick texts during the day, but there was a shift I could feel. Sometimes when he thought I was not looking, he would smile at his phone. He would angle the screen slightly away from me. He was not reckless, but he was not careful enough. On Thursday, he left for work early, saying he had a big meeting. I went in at my usual time, went through my tasks, and waited. Around 6 p.m., I texted him asking if he was on his way. He replied 10 minutes later, "Still at the office. Do not wait up for dinner." I drove downtown again, parking in the same spot as before. The streets were crowded, people moving in every direction, the city lit up with the last traces of daylight. I stayed in the car, watching the glass doors of his building. At 7:30, he walked out. Same suit, same loosened tie. The woman in the beige coat was beside him again. This time, they headed in the opposite direction from before. I waited until they were half a block away, then got out of the car and followed at a distance. They walked into a wine bar. I stayed across the street, leaning against a lamppost. Through the large front windows, I could see them sit at a table near the back. He poured wine into her glass. She leaned forward when she spoke. He smiled in a way I had not seen in years. I stood there for 20 minutes before walking away. I did not want to see them leave together. I already knew where that would lead. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think. I spent hours scrolling through my phone, searching for private investigators in the city. Around noon, I called one. His voice was calm, almost bored, like this was just another day for him. I gave him my husband's name, his office address, his car make and model. He asked for a recent photo. I sent one from our last vacation. He told me he could start that evening. When my husband came home that night, I asked how his day had been. He said busy. He said he might have to go in on Saturday. I smiled and said I understood. On Saturday morning, he left around 9. The investigator texted me at 10, saying he had eyes on him. 2 hours later, another text came through. A photo of my husband walking into a hotel lobby with the same woman in the beige coat. The photo was clear. There was no way to twist it into something innocent. I stared at it for a long time. My coffee had gone cold. My phone buzzed again. Another photo, this time of them leaving the hotel 3 hours later. She was laughing. He was holding her hand. The investigator called me that evening to go over the details. I barely said anything. My voice felt strange in my own ears, as if it belonged to someone else. He said he would send the full report on Monday. When my husband came home, I asked how work had gone. He said fine. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat down to watch TV. I watched the back of his head and wondered how many times he had done this, how many lies he had stacked on top of each other without slipping. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed beside him, listening to his breathing. I thought about the photos on my phone, the beige coat, the receipt. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the plans we'd made. And I realized I did not feel shock anymore. I felt something heavier. In the morning, I got up before him and made coffee. He walked into the kitchen, yawning, asking if I wanted to do something together that day. I said I had errands to run. He nodded, not pushing. When he left the room, I picked up my phone and opened the investigator's message again. The images filled the screen. I took a deep breath and decided I was done, waiting for him to tell me the truth. Because the next step would not be a question. It would be something he could not lie his way out of. I spent Sunday afternoon alone in the house, waiting for him to leave again. He had mentioned grabbing drinks with a coworker later that evening, and I wanted him out so I could go through the things he never meant me to see. At 6, he came into the kitchen wearing a shirt I had not seen in months. He said he might be late, not to wait up. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. I listened to the sound of his car pulling away before moving. I went straight to his office. The top drawers of his desk were neat, pens lined up, envelopes stacked. The bottom drawer was locked. I knew he kept the key in his nightstand. I walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer, and found it under a pile of receipts. Inside the locked drawer were folders, most of them work-related. But toward the back, there was a small black notebook. I opened it and flipped through, dates, times, and short notes written in his tight handwriting, dinners, hotel names, initials that I did not recognize. My hands were steady as I turned each page. There were entries going back 6 months. Some months had only 1 or 2 meetings. Others had several in a week. One entry caught my eye, the same date as the Italian restaurant charge. The initials LM were written next to it. I put everything back exactly as it was, locked the drawer, and returned the key to his nightstand. Then I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I had the investigator's report, the photos, and now this notebook. When he came home after 10, I asked if he had a good time. He said yes. The coworker had just gotten promoted. He opened a beer, asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I told him I was tired and went to bed. The next morning, I called the investigator again. I asked him if he could find out who LM was. He said he would call me back. At work, I kept my phone face down on my desk. Around noon, it buzzed. The investigator told me her name. Lauren Mitchell, mid-30s, works in marketing for a company not far from my husband's office. Divorced 2 years ago. No children. Hearing her name made it more real. She was no longer just a woman in a beige coat. She was someone with a life, a past, and apparently, a place in mine now. I thanked the investigator and hung up. For the rest of the day, I barely spoke to anyone. I left work early, saying I had a headache. When I got home, I opened my laptop and searched her name. Her photo came up in seconds. The same face I had seen across the street at the wine bar. A professional headshot, smiling, confident. I scrolled through pages of results, conference panels she had spoken at, articles she had written, a charity 5K she had participated in last summer. It was strange seeing her life laid out in front of me. I knew where she worked, what causes she supported, the kind of clothes she wore. But I did not know what she sounded like, what she had said to him the first time they met, or how many times they had been together. When my husband came home that night, I watched him as he took off his shoes, loosened his tie, and asked what was for dinner. I told him I had already eaten. He looked at me for a second, then went to the fridge. We barely spoke the rest of the evening. I could feel the space between us getting wider, and I let it happen. The next day, I made a decision. I would not confront him in our house. I wanted him somewhere public, where he could not walk away or shut a door in my face. I called him at lunch and suggested we meet for dinner on Friday. He hesitated for a moment, then said yes. He asked if it was for something special. I told him it was just to spend time together. On Friday evening, I arrived at the restaurant early and chose a table near the back. I ordered water and waited. He walked in right on time, smiling like nothing was wrong. We ordered our meals, made small talk, and then I pulled out my phone. I placed it on the table, screen up, with the investigator's photos open. His smile faded immediately. He stared at the screen for a long time without touching it. Then he looked at me and asked where I had gotten them. I said it did not matter. He started to speak, stopped, then tried again. He said it was not what it looked like. I told him I knew her name. I told him I had the dates, the places, the hotel. His face changed then, not guilty, not ashamed, just resigned. The waitress came by to refill our glasses. Neither of us spoke until she walked away. When he finally opened his mouth again, it was to ask how long I had known. I told him about the restaurant charge, about the night I saw them leave his office. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. He said he had been meaning to tell me. I laughed once without humor and asked him when exactly that would have been. He did not answer. We sat in silence until the food arrived. I pushed my plate away after 2 bites. He kept glancing at me like he wanted to explain, but nothing came out. When the check came, I paid. He did not argue. Outside the restaurant, he asked if we could talk at home. I said no. I told him we were done talking for the night. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and got in. He stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds, then turned and walked in the opposite direction. I sat there, watching him disappear before starting the engine. Because the next time we spoke, it would not be about explanations. It would be about what came after. I drove home after the dinner, the streets almost empty, headlights catching on wet pavement. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already there. The kitchen light was on. Inside, he was sitting at the table with a beer in front of him. He looked up when I walked in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He asked if I wanted to sit down. I stayed standing. He said he wanted to explain. I told him I was not interested in explanations. His mouth tightened, but he nodded. I walked past him into the bedroom. I could hear him moving in the kitchen, opening the fridge, closing it again. I shut the bedroom door and sat on the bed. My bag was still in my hand. I set it on the floor and took off my shoes. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. I did not answer. I heard his footsteps retreat. The sound of the TV came on in the living room. I lay there until I could hear him switching off the lights. The mattress dipped slightly as he got into bed. We both stayed on our own sides. In the morning, I woke before him. I made coffee and sat at the table with my phone. He came in, poured his own cup, and sat across from me. He said we needed to talk. I said fine. He started with how unhappy he had been for a while, how things between us had changed. He said he had not planned for it to happen. I asked him how long it had been going on. He said almost a year. I felt the number land, but I did not react. I asked him if she was the only one. He looked at me for a moment, then said yes. I told him I was contacting a lawyer. He put his cup down harder than necessary and asked if I was sure I wanted to do that. I said I was. He said we could work through it, that people did. I said I was not one of those people. We sat there for a few minutes in silence. Then he got up, left his coffee half full, and went to shower. I stayed at the table, scrolling through the list of divorce attorneys I had looked up the night before. At 9, I started making calls. By noon, I had an appointment for Wednesday. I did not tell him. That evening, he came home with takeout from my favorite Thai place. He set the bag on the counter and said we could eat and talk. I told him I was not hungry. He asked if I was going to give him the silent treatment until the lawyer paper showed up. I didn't answer. He ate alone, the sound of his fork against the container loud in the quiet room. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next day, he texted me at work, asking if we could meet for lunch. I ignored it. When I came home, there was a bouquet of flowers on the counter. I moved them into the sink without putting them in water. On Wednesday, I met with the lawyer. She was direct, asking about assets, accounts, property. I gave her everything she needed. She explained the process, how long it might take, what I should expect. By the time I left her office, I had the first set of forms in my bag. That evening, I came home to find him in the living room, the flowers gone, the table clear. He asked where I had been. I said out. He asked if it was with the lawyer. I didn't answer. He leaned back on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Then he said he did not want this to get ugly. I told him that was up to him. For the next 2 days, we barely spoke. We moved around each other in the house like strangers. He made his own meals. I made mine. On Friday night, I got an email from the investigator with one last photo set. I had not asked for it. In the images, he and Lauren were in a different restaurant, sitting close, her hand on his arm. The timestamp was from Wednesday night, the same night I had met with the lawyer. I stared at the photos for a long time before forwarding them to my personal folder. When he came home that night, I was already in the guest room with the door shut. He knocked once, lightly. I didn't answer. He stood there for a few seconds before walking away. The next morning, I put the lawyer's paperwork on the kitchen counter. He came in while I was pouring coffee. His eyes went straight to the stack. He asked if I was really doing this. I said yes. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "Then I guess this is it." I nodded, because there was nothing else left to say. After he said, "Then I guess this is it," he didn't move right away. He stood at the counter looking at the papers as if they might disappear if he stared long enough. I took my coffee to the guest room and closed the door. I could hear him moving around in the kitchen, opening drawers, running water. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. When I came out later, the papers were gone from the counter. I found them in the living room on the coffee table, untouched except for the corner bent slightly, like he'd picked them up and put them back down. He spent most of the day in his office. I stayed in the guest room with my laptop, going over the list of joint accounts and making notes of what I needed to separate. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard him leave the house. His car engine faded down the street. I used the time to go into our bedroom. I opened the closet and pulled out the small safe we kept on the floor behind the shoes. I spun the combination and opened it. Inside were passports, a few old family documents, and a small envelope with cash, maybe $1,000. I left everything where it was, closed the safe, and pushed it back into place. When he came home 2 hours later, he didn't say where he had been. He didn't mention the paperwork. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, while I made a list of bills in the guest room. That night, I got an email from my lawyer asking me to confirm the asset list before she filed the first set of documents. I went over every line twice before sending it back. The next morning, Saturday, he asked if I wanted to go over the papers together. I told him there was nothing to go over. He said he thought maybe we could work out the details without lawyers. I told him that wasn't going to happen. We spent the day in separate rooms. He made himself lunch. I went out for a walk. When I came back, he was on the couch watching a game. The coffee table was clear. The paperwork was gone. I didn't ask where he'd put it. That night, he knocked on the guest room door. I opened it a few inches. He asked if we could talk somewhere else, not here. I said no. On Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of the front door closing. I looked out the window and saw him pulling out of the driveway. I checked the time, just after 7. I didn't hear from him for most of the day. In the afternoon, he sent a text. "We need to decide who's keeping the house." I didn't answer right away. When I did, I told him I would be keeping it. He replied 5 minutes later, "Fine." That evening, he came home with a box under his arm. He set it on the kitchen counter and opened it. Inside were framed photos, our wedding, vacations, family gatherings. He started taking them out and stacking them face down. I stood in the doorway, watching. He didn't look at me. He just kept stacking the frames. When the box was full, he closed it and carried it into the garage. The next day, my lawyer called to say she had filed the initial paperwork. She said he would be served within the week. I asked her not to tell me the exact day. I didn't want to be in the house when it happened. On Tuesday, I worked late. When I got home, there was another box in the living room, this one filled with his clothes. The closet on his side was half empty. He came in from the garage carrying a smaller box. He set it on the floor, looked at me and said, "It's just easier to start now." I didn't answer. We moved around each other that week, the rooms feeling bigger as more of his things disappeared. He didn't slam doors. He didn't raise his voice. He just packed. On Friday, I came home to find his car gone and the garage door open. Inside, there were 3 large boxes stacked against the wall. A folded blanket sat on top. I closed the garage and went inside. On the kitchen counter was a single key, his house key, with no note. I stood there for a while, looking at it. The house was quiet. I walked through each room, noticing the spaces where his things had been. In the bedroom, his side of the closet was empty except for one hanger. In the bathroom, his toothbrush was gone. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the key. It was cold in my hand. I set it down again, exactly where it had been. Then I turned off the light and walked out of the room. After I turned off the kitchen light, I went to the guest room and closed the door. I didn't bother changing clothes, just lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I stayed there until the light coming in through the blinds faded to black. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because when I opened my eyes again, the clock read 2:17 a.m. I got up, walked through the hallway, and checked the garage. His car wasn't there. I didn't know if he had stayed somewhere else or was still out, but I didn't care enough to call or text. I went back to bed and slept until morning. Saturday began without him. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my phone, and scrolled through the news. Around 9:30, I opened my email. There was a message from my lawyer. Short. Just a note letting me know the process server would deliver the divorce papers within the next few days. She asked if I wanted to be told the exact time so I could be away from home. I replied that I didn't need to know. I was halfway through my second cup when I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. His car door slammed, and a moment later, the front door opened. He didn't say anything as he walked past me toward the bedroom. A few minutes later, he came back with a duffel bag. He put it by the door, went into the kitchen, and poured himself a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted more. We stayed in the same room, but didn't talk. After a few minutes, he picked up his bag and left. No goodbye, no look back. The rest of the day passed in small mechanical tasks. I stripped the bed in the guest room, did laundry, took out the trash. In the afternoon, I sat with my laptop and went through the online banking portal. I listed every account we still had together. Savings, checking, credit cards. I printed the last 3 months of statements and filed them with the other paperwork for my lawyer. By early evening, the house felt too still. I went for a walk around the block, taking longer than I needed just to avoid being inside. When I came back, there was a message from my lawyer's office asking for confirmation of the asset list. I reviewed it twice, signed, and sent it back. Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was my lawyer again. She told me the papers had been served to him at 8:30 that morning. She didn't share details, but I could tell from her voice that it had not been a calm exchange. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A text from him. Really? This is how you do it? I didn't reply. 10 minutes after that, a call came in from his number. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. I kept myself busy through the morning. I cleaned the kitchen, reorganized the pantry, anything that kept me from sitting still. At noon, I walked to the bank branch near my house and opened a new account in my name alone. I set up my paycheck to be deposited there starting next pay cycle. The teller gave me a folder with the account details. I slipped it into my bag without looking at it. Back home, there was another missed call from him. This time, he left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I set my phone face down on the counter and went into the bedroom to change clothes. Around 3, I heard his car in the driveway. I stayed in the bedroom while the front door opened and closed. A minute later, the sound of cardboard sliding across the floor. When I came out, there was a box on the coffee table. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was glassware. Wine glasses, a decanter we'd gotten as a wedding gift. He didn't look at me as he worked, just kept wrapping each piece and setting it into the box. "I'm only taking what's mine," he said finally, still not looking up. I didn't answer. When he finished, he carried the box outside, then came back for another. Before he reached the door, he stopped. "This doesn't have to turn into a fight," he said. I walked past him into the kitchen without responding. He left a few minutes later. I locked the door behind him. That night, I sat in the guest room with my laptop, reading through the next steps my lawyer had sent. Court dates, mandatory disclosures, timelines. It all looked like a schedule for a life I hadn't planned to have. At 8:30, my phone buzzed, a voicemail icon. I pressed play. His voice was low, deliberate. He said it wasn't what I thought, that Lauren wasn't the reason, that things had been broken for a while. I stopped the message halfway through and deleted it. 20 minutes later, another call came in, an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a woman's voice. "I think we should talk." It took me a moment to place it. "Lauren." I hung up without saying a word. My hand stayed still on the desk long after the call ended. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark for a while. No music, no TV, just the sound of the refrigerator and the occasional hum of a car passing outside. Around 10, I turned my phone off completely, because I knew that whatever came next, I wasn't ready to hear it from either of them. The next morning, I turned my phone back on. The screen lit up with a row of notifications. 12 missed calls, 6 from his number, 2 from an unknown number, the rest from numbers I did not recognize. Several unread texts. I didn't open any of them. I set the phone face down on the counter and made coffee. Halfway through my first cup, there was a knock at the door. Not hurried, slow, deliberate, 3 taps. I froze in place, my hand still on the mug. It came again. I stood in the hallway where I couldn't be seen from the front windows and waited. The knocking stopped. After another half minute, I stepped to the peephole. The porch was empty. I went back to the kitchen. The coffee was cooling, but I drank it anyway. I opened my laptop and checked my email. My lawyer had sent a message late last night. She needed copies of our last 5 years of tax returns. I went into the office, opened the filing cabinet, and pulled the folders out one by one. I stacked them neatly on the desk and placed a large envelope beside them. Around noon, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I didn't need to look to know it was his. The engine shut off, a door slammed, and seconds later, there was a heavier knock at the front door. "I just want to talk." His voice came through the wood. I stayed silent. The knock came again, harder. "I know you're in there." I stood still in the hallway. My breathing was slow, my arms crossed. After a long pause, the knocking stopped. I waited. Then I heard his footsteps on the porch steps. I went to the front window and moved the curtain just enough to see. His car was still there. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. No phone in his hand, no movement, just sitting. 10 minutes passed before he started the engine and backed out. I took the tax folders from the desk, slid them into the envelope, and put it on the kitchen counter. Then I made a list of joint accounts, savings, checking, credit cards, and marked which ones I would close. Every few minutes, I checked the driveway again. At 5 in the evening, my phone lit up. His name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. If you won't talk to me, maybe you'll talk to her. I stopped it before it ended and deleted it. That night, before it was even fully dark, I locked every door and window. In the guest room, I lay in bed without turning on the light, my ears tuned to every sound. The house stayed quiet. On Sunday morning, I left before 8 and drove to my sister's house 2 towns over. She greeted me at the door with coffee already poured. I didn't tell her about the calls or the message. We sat in her kitchen for over an hour, talking about her kids, her work, her plans for the week. On the drive home, I stopped at a hardware store. I bought a new deadbolt for the front door and a chain lock for the back. The cashier put them in a small plastic bag. When I got home, I set the bag on the counter and installed the deadbolt myself. My hands were steady until the last screw when the drill bit slipped. At 7 that evening, my phone rang again. The same unknown number. I didn't answer. On Monday morning, I drove to my lawyer's office with the envelope of tax returns. She asked if there had been any trouble since he'd been served. I told her there had been calls and visits, but nothing more. She gave me a stamped copy of the filed petition and told me to keep it in a safe place. When I turned onto my street an hour later, I saw his car in my driveway. He was standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets. I parked at the curb and stayed inside my car until he noticed me. He walked toward me, slow and deliberate. "I'm not here to fight," he said through the closed window. "I just want to explain." I didn't unlock the door. After a moment, he stepped back and pointed toward the porch. Then he turned and walked to his car. I waited until he drove away before pulling into the driveway. On the porch was a small cardboard box. Inside were a set of house keys, my spare car key, and 2 unopened letters addressed to me. I carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen counter. That evening, my lawyer emailed again. The first court date was set for 6 weeks from now. She said it would be brief, procedural, but I had to be there. I added it to my calendar. Before bed, I walked through the house, checking every door and window. When I reached the kitchen, the counter was empty. The box was gone. I froze. I checked the porch. Nothing. I checked the living room, the hallway, the guest room. No sign of it. All the doors were locked. Every window was closed. I stood in the center of the kitchen, listening. And for the first time since this began, I was no longer sure I was alone in my own house. I stood in the kitchen longer than I realized, staring at the empty stretch of counter where the box had been. My mind tried to fill the gap with explanations that didn't make sense. Maybe I had moved it myself without noticing. Maybe I had absent-mindedly put it somewhere else. But I knew I hadn't touched it since I brought it in from the porch. I started checking every room, going slower this time than the first sweep. I opened the hallway closet, looked behind the coats, and ran my hand along the shelf. I moved into the living room, scanned the bookshelves, even pulled out the drawers in the coffee table. The guest room was next, under the bed, in the small dresser, behind the door. Nothing. I went back into the kitchen and started opening cabinets, plates stacked exactly as they always were. Glasses lined up in their rows, pantry shelves in the same order I'd left them. No box. It was past midnight when I finally sat at the table. I didn't turn on my phone or the TV. I didn't play music. I just sat there, staring at the counter. At some point, exhaustion must have pulled me under, because the next thing I knew, the low rumble of the garbage truck outside shook me awake. The morning light was filtering in through the blinds. I stood slowly, every joint stiff, and made coffee. While the coffee brewed, I walked through the house, checking each lock. The new deadbolt was still turned. The chain on the back door was exactly where I'd left it. Still, a faint unease spread through me. I remembered the old sliding window in the laundry room, the one we never fixed properly because it wasn't a big deal. It could be lifted from the outside if someone knew exactly where to press. He knew. He had helped me paint the frame last summer. I stood there, realizing the locks I'd been counting on didn't mean the house was truly sealed. The windows were closed, the latches down. Around 10, I finally turned my phone back on. 2 missed calls from him, one from the unknown number. A text from my lawyer's office reminding me to gather mortgage statements and insurance policies. I ignored the calls, replied to the lawyer's office with a short, "I'll have them ready today," and went into the office to get the files. By noon, I had a neat stack of papers on the desk. I decided to make lunch before heading to the lawyer's office. That was when I saw it. The box was back on the counter. I stopped in the doorway. Everything in me went still. It was sitting in the same spot as before, but the contents were slightly shifted. The largest key was now on top of the others. The letters were stacked differently. I stepped closer, not touching it, just looking. The keys were the same ones I had seen before. House key, garage key, my spare car key, but they were not lying in the same arrangement. I backed out of the kitchen, stood in the hallway until my breathing slowed, then turned and went back to the guest room. I stayed there for the next few hours with the door locked. At one point, I even considered setting up my phone to record the kitchen, just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining it. But the thought of watching those hours of footage, of possibly seeing exactly how it appeared, made my stomach turn. For now, I told myself I didn't need to see it happen, only to know that it did. My phone sat on the nightstand, the ringer off. I kept glancing at it anyway. At 4 o'clock, it lit up with his name. I let it go to voicemail. The message was longer this time. He said we needed to meet, that there were things I didn't know, that I'd regret not hearing him out. I deleted it without finishing. That evening, I made dinner and ate it standing at the counter, my eyes fixed on the box the entire time. I wanted to throw it in the trash, but something in me said not to touch it. When I did my nightly check of the locks, the box was still on the counter. I went to bed in the guest room, closing the door firmly. Sometime in the night, I woke to the sound of a creak from the back of the house. Not the faint sounds a house makes when it settles. Heavier, slower. I stayed still, breathing shallow, listening for the chain on the back door. It didn't move. After a few minutes, the silence returned. In the morning, the deadbolt was still turned. The chain was still in place. But when I walked into the kitchen, the counter was empty again. This time, I didn't search for it. I made coffee, got dressed, and gathered the documents for my lawyer. I drove straight to her office, handed them over, and said I'd bring the rest by the end of the week. She asked if everything at home was okay. I told her it was quiet. On the drive back, I kept checking my mirrors. No one followed me, but I didn't take my usual route home. I circled 2 extra blocks before pulling into the driveway. The porch was empty. The counter inside was bare. I spent the rest of the day in the guest room, with the door shut. I didn't answer the phone, didn't check the kitchen. When night came, I heard it again. a faint step on the porch, a pause, then another. I didn't get up. I didn't look. I lay in bed, staring at the door until the sound faded. In the morning, I walked into the kitchen. The box was back. One of the letters was open. The letter lay on top of the box, unfolded, the envelope set neatly beside it. My name was written in his handwriting, the same tight, deliberate print I had seen on grocery lists, birthday cards, and notes left on the fridge. I stayed in the doorway for a long time before moving closer. I didn't touch it right away. I could already see the first few words of the first line, but my eyes didn't move down the page. It felt like crossing a line, as if reading it would confirm something I hadn't been ready to accept. Finally, I reached out and picked it up. The paper was lined, torn from a spiral-bound notebook. He wrote that he had been inside the house several times since moving out. He didn't say when, and he didn't say how. He wrote that the locks didn't matter, that he still had a right to come in. He claimed the box was his way of proving it. He wrote that he wanted me to know he could be there anytime he wanted. There was no apology anywhere on the page. No explanation about Lauren. No mention of the divorce. Not even a sentence about what he wanted to talk about. Near the end, he had written the same sentence twice, almost like he wanted it to stick. You will talk to me eventually. I set the letter back on the box, exactly as I'd found it, and stepped away from the counter. My phone was in the guest room. I didn't go get it. I didn't want him to know yet that I had read it. The rest of the morning, I stayed in the guest room with the blinds closed. I locked the door, even though I was inside my own house. Every sound made me pause. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak from the floorboards, the sound of a car slowing as it passed outside. At noon, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. I told her about the box, the letter, and what he had written. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said she would request a temporary restraining order and contact the court immediately. She asked if I felt safe staying in the house until then. I didn't answer right away. She suggested I consider staying with someone else, at least for a few nights. I told her I would think about it. When I hung up, I saw a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I didn't need to play it to know it was him. I deleted it without listening. In the afternoon, I started packing a small bag. I put in 2 changes of clothes, basic toiletries, my laptop, and the large folder with all of my legal documents. I left the bag by the bed. I didn't lock the guest room door when I went back into the kitchen. The box was gone again. I stood where it had been for a long time, looking at the empty counter. I didn't search for it. I poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, and returned to the guest room. The rest of the day passed without any knocks at the door or calls from him. I answered one email from my lawyer confirming the court's next steps, then shut my laptop. I stayed in bed, scrolling through nothing on my phone, waiting for night. Around 8, there was a single knock at the front door. Not loud, not repeated. I froze, listening. No voice followed it. No footsteps. I didn't move from the bed. I counted to 60 in my head. Still nothing. It was nearly an hour later when I decided to leave. I put on my coat, picked up the bag, and walked to the front door. I opened it just enough to see the porch. It was empty. The driveway was empty. I locked the door behind me and went to the car. My bag sat in the passenger seat. I started the engine and drove away without turning on the radio. I didn't go to my sister's. I didn't go to a friend's. I just drove. I kept checking my mirrors, not because I thought I was being followed, but because I wanted to be sure. After almost an hour, I saw the glowing sign of a small roadside motel. I pulled in and parked under one of the streetlights. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and stale coffee. I asked for 2 nights. The clerk took my ID, slid it back to me, and handed me a key card with the room number written on the sleeve. The room was at the far end of a quiet hallway. As I slid the deadbolt across, I caught the clerk's eyes lingering on me from behind the counter. For a moment, I wondered if he had recognized my last name from the ID. My husband had stayed here once before, years ago, when his office had been fumigated. He'd told me the manager owed him a favor. I pushed the thought aside, but the way the lock clicked into place didn't make me feel safer. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and dropped my bag onto the chair by the window. The curtains were heavy, the carpet thin, and the hum of the heating unit filled the space. I sat on the bed and stared at my bag for a while. My phone was still in my coat pocket. I took it out, powered it off completely, and placed it face down on the nightstand. I didn't unpack. I didn't shower. I just lay down on top of the blanket. The pillow was flat, the fabric rough, but I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the outline of my bag in the dim light coming from the street outside. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the room was dim with early morning light. My bag was still on the chair, but something was different. On top of it sat the box. It was positioned perfectly in the center. The same keys, the same envelopes. But the letter that had been opened on my kitchen counter was gone. I didn't move toward it. I stayed on the bed, my hands gripping the blanket, watching it from across the room. And I realized I had no way of knowing how long it had been there, or if it had ever left at all. What would you do in my place? Please write your thoughts in the comments. I will be happy to read them.